Hey, it is your buddy, Peace and Harmony with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful, empowered harmonizers. We are zooming in and focusing in a little bit more in depth on a great viewer question, and that is how to understand the psychopath and their propensity towards boredom. When we talk about a psychopathic individual, we're talking about someone who might be coined as an intra-species predator. Dr. Robert Hare, he developed basically the Hare checklist to help to define, distinguish, and sort of diagnose psychopathy. In a lot of that population, not only do we see in business, music, the arts, etc., but also in the incarcerated or prison system. When you're talking about a psychopath, you're also talking about somebody with a lack of conscience and really poor judgment and really an inability to stay sort of on track when it comes to learning lessons. A psychopath is wired a little bit differently, and it creates sort of a propensity towards boredom, and then on the flip side, these sort of high risk violatory behaviors. So when you're trying to heal through this, or and you're in the midst of trying to move through this relationship, it's important to understand the wiring, sort of the cause that creates the effect, and then how do you basically detach yourself from this lifestyle, this type of relationship, emotional habit that can be picked up literally through like osmosis or being in close proximity to this individual or individuals, male or female. So the female psychopath, they have a little bit different wiring. The way their brain structures are set up. They have a reduced size of the amygdala, studies have shown. And that is your fear center. That is your fight or flight center. That's the one that goes, whoa, urgent, flash, emergency, and then you start going into high action mode. You're in the self-protection mode. You can have, really intense bursts of energy. Your eyes are wide open. You're trying to take in more stimulus. Your breathing might be, rapidity of breathing. Your pulse rate might go up. That's the amygdala, which is then, you're the sort of that fear center. So that is switched on when you need, self-protection, protection of your boundaries, protection of your standards, protection of your identity, protection of your needs. That is just, it's sort of built in. It's an automatic process for you. And it's meant to be able to be there to escalate your energy for short bursts of time to get through an emergency. I mean, imagine way back in the day, if you were, presented with a saber-toothed tiger, your fight or flight would switch on. You would then be thinking of maybe rapid thoughts, rapid heart rate, rapid breathing, and trying to determine, calling on what you have learned to how to manage and navigate the situation. So this area of the brain is in reduced size and reduced activity in the psychopath. So they don't then experience this sort of experience of fear or the onset of fear. So you might call them fearless. They might be considered like a fearless leader. Oftentimes these qualities are very redeeming in a company, a corporation, business, etc. Whether it's in finance, the arts, movies, really, when we start getting into this where it requires for you to be able to manage a lot of stress, oftentimes to a degree and level that most people could not handle, these individuals do not feel afraid. They do not feel fearful. They can go and just, walk into a situation and not be affected. They will notice then that others are affected. They'll notice their expressions, and they'll pick that up because that's a type of expression that they don't have organically. It's not, they for like a movie, where most people would be like trying to cling to somebody, they might just be like laughing, or good for them that they got away with this. That's my type of hero. That's my role model. So a psychopath has a real big differential within their physiological makeup, specifically in the brain structures. And, you learn in science, structure is function, or structure, form is function. So, and then with this, there's also a reduced size of the prefrontal cortex, which is for looking forward, having a vision, being able to be decisive, have good judgment, where your consciousness is. In other words, this would be wrong for me to do. I'm not going to do this. This is against the law. I'm not going to do this. That's your consciousness morality kicking in. You would not engage in that high risk behavior because you know of the consequences. And you don't want the negative consequences, so you get fearful. You might then, connect with other people, start trying to figure it out, and then calm down. But the psychopath does not have that, and then coupled with a reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is there for sort of a vision, learning, moral development, morality, and then, so building on past mistakes and not doing that again. So a psychopath, funny enough, they will continue to make the same mistakes because they just don't learn. And they don't feel bad about it. They might, you might get a psychopathic rage where all of a sudden they just start flipping out, and then it's just calm back to normal again. And they're eerily serene in situations where most people would be agitated, concerned. I mean, imagine if you saw, a riot or, something of that nature where people were getting hurt or stampeded. The psychopath might just be like, run people. In other words, they're rooting for sort of the bad guy. They're impressed by this, and they will chuckle, and they know that they are set aside, and different from others because of this. They then view others as sort of being held back. In other words, or stupid, or, you're slowed down because you're fearful. You're slowed down because this is not right. You're not going anywhere in your life because you won't violate this. So they have those sort of thoughts, and then so they know then that they have to pick up a very intense facade, a mask, which they're, some people call them bad actors. A lot of newscasts, they might just say that person's a bad actor. And I think oftentimes what they're referring to is someone who is psychopathic. And so this propensity towards boredom is not only coupled with these differential structures, but they have a higher sensitivity to dopamine, the neurotransmitter, which is sort of secreted when you are rewarded. You have a feel-good moment, a feel-good experience. That's your dopamine kicking in. It's like your internal reward system. It's your feel-good system. And this this dopamine, studies have shown that in the psychopath, they are 5 times more sensitive to this. So when they want something, they want something. And they also have, studies have shown that they have a higher presence of testosterone, which is sort of, that male dominating energy, aggressiveness, assertiveness. So you might see, very, in other words, they have no inhibitions, and then really a lack of empathy. They don't have empathy. They can mimic empathy. They can mimic fear. They can mimic interest. They can mimic love. They can mimic being loyal to you, but it's just for them to get through that moment, and then they can have a completely different relationship, a completely different career, a second and third life, if you will, that are completely conflicting in nature. You might consider this like a multiple personality disorder. Back in the day, you might have heard about that expose called Sybil, with this person with multiple personalities. That is different than this, but really they go through sort of a metamorphosis, a change, even in their appearance. It's almost like a salamander, or those octopuses that you would see in Jacques Cousteau back in the day, where the octopus is clay colored as it's going through like the white sandy beach of the bottom of the ocean, and then there's some rocks, and then they change their appearance and what looks like a texture, so that then they blend in with the rocks. A real intense, thing out of marine life. And then of course there's salamanders, I think, also that kind of change their appearance to blend in like a camouflage. So the psychopath does a similar metamorphosis, a similar transformation to quote unquote fill in or fit in. So they can go from the bad boy to the intellect the bad girl to the intellect. They will change their countenance, their face, their musculature changes, their demeanor changes, the way that they talk changes, the cadence of their voice, the sound of the voice, and sort of, the softness or hardness can be very variable. It can sort of be, just you would not like a ventriloquist, but just really different. Like you would not recognize them. I mean, so if you see the mask drop in the psychopath, this might be what you're seeing. So all of a sudden, the coloring of their skin might look very different. They might have a look about them that gives you an instant fear. You're like, oh my gosh, like there's something that has just changed in this person, and it makes you very unsettled. So they might, purposely drop the mask to sort of show you who they are, but they're not going to say, I don't feel fear, I engage in high-risk behaviors and have a propensity to boredom. I mean, they're not going to come out and say that. The psychopath might, give what you might call a word salad, where they just sort of blurt these things out of context that is their clue to listening others, or particularly those who they are targeting. They'll say, sort of strange comments that seem to come out of nowhere, and they'll say, I'm dangerous, and they won't say it with like a warning. It's just like they're just telling it to you, and they might even say it to you with a smile, and you might kind of not respond because it doesn't sort of fit in with the conversation, or you're not knowing what they're talking about. But in hindsight, looking back, hindsight will be 20/20. In other words, you'll be able to get a clear vision when you kind of reflect back on this as you emerge away from this type of interspecies predatory relationship. But the propensity towards boredom is because the psychopath sort of needs this stimulation all the time. They need to amp up, they've got the testosterone going, they've got the reduced amygdala, so they're not inhibited by things that normally people would. I'm afraid, I wouldn't want to leave my kids alone. I wouldn't want to disappoint my kids. I'd be afraid of what they're going to say about me in my family or at my work or my community. So those usually don't cross their mind. And so then the propensity towards boredom is basically they don't like to be just sitting doing nothing. It's an uncomfortable feeling for them. They need to amp up and feel that's what makes them feel alive. And oftentimes what makes them feel alive, in my viewpoint, is this sort of trickery and real duplicity, deception, and concealment from others. I mean, their personality change can be very airtight. I mean, and very complete. But it's different from a mental disorder like multiple personalities, which causes that person distress. The psychopath is usually not distressed by this. They kind of feel like the world is their oyster. They can do a lot of things that most other people would not be comfortable with. Violation of laws, violation of protocol, violation of hierarchy, doing things that normally people would put the brakes on, and they say, nope, not going to do that. But then they'll then, sort of hyper arouse and then stimulate others, where they're sort of then addicted to this, and they get people addicted by breaking them down. And so, in breaking them down, meaning, constantly texting, constantly sending photos in the middle of times when you should be sleeping or eating or working, and then you have to sort of, it just feeds the addiction. This, becomes the high risk behaviors that you might see. And because of this, this set of neurochemical and structural differences, you will see this, but they oftentimes are very concealing of this until they, the mask will drop or you expose them. So this boredom means that you'll think that, wow, they have a lot of energy. How can they have relationships with this person, and this person, and I'll fill it into their one calendar? I mean, it's to a degree that most people are not capable of. So you might then experience this sort of hyper arousal, where they're breaking you down and then just sort of reformatting one's thought according to psychopathic thought. to get you seeing things differently. And a lot of people might, find this interesting, or, they think it's funny, or it's very seductive. Usually, the type of communication, which keeps them, feeling they have an insatiable need for control over others, and to sort of, they have a very parasitic approach. In other words, the people who they will find themselves connected to will have something that in their mind they need. So maybe you have a computer that they need to borrow. You have a series of contacts that they need to, that you will divulge, and then they'll get it for their business or what have you. They will engage in these sort of violations to break people down and get you off kilter, get you off homeostasis, and sort of on their homeostasis, on their track. So it becomes a real idiosyncratic way of communicating. And not just like, when you have, your old friends and you go back and you kind of have the same, you pick up where you left off and you're giggly or goofy or something like that. With a psychopath, they are sort of trying to, I would say, use enigmatic speech, which it means puzzling. Going into a lot of puzzling, just sort of the way that they project the vibe from their body, and the way that they refer to things in their environment will usually have sort of a sexual or hyper arousing nature. So people will begin to perceive something that is different from their normal way of perception, but you're then in the hands of a master manipulator, or almost like a puppeteer, and they will really take people over. I mean, it's kind of like a psychological hijacking. Not that people are like, giving them attention or interested. Oftentimes this person is on this other sort of dimension or level, like, what are they trying to communicate to me now? And then you become like an investigator or a super sleuth to try to figure out, why are they talking to you in this enigmatic comment, and it will break people down. It'll sort of cause people to abandon their usual values, their way of thinking, and then get them to deplete bank accounts, move, pay for their other child's camp, or all sorts of different things. In hindsight, there's usually this very parasitic nature, because a psychopath will tell you that they need others. They need to be able to have this manipulation to sort of navigate their day. And it's not really a relationship, it's just kind of an interface that you have with them. And the propensity for boredom will keep them doing this and sort of breaking people down, and really cause them to go in many other directions which seem contradictory in nature. In other words, they're preparing to be married, and that, as far as that person knows, they're in an exclusive relationship. But for the psychopath, they have a great facility with lying, and they can just lie oftentimes without even any detection. They can fool professionals, they can fool lie detector tests. I mean, their body doesn't go through the same physiological reaction. So they're not fearful, and to them, this is a plus. They interpret this as, they feel that they are better than, can kind of get what they want, and that they're, they can outsmart others, and others, are sort of inferior. It's sort of their process. So when they break people down, through a number of different things, the distraction, oftentimes, especially now, I would say with the devices, they're able to, I would think, get more, be able to take more targets or prey, or really sort of, it's like more of their psychopathic playground, especially now with the online dating and, the Facebook and all the different things, where very easily, people are not suspecting of them, because they might look gorgeous, very intelligent, very, very accomplished in their field. They might seem, to be a great conversationalist, very good looking, very charming. Je ne sais quoi. I don't know what it is, but when I'm around them, I feel like I'm melting into butter and like putty in their hands. So the psychopath knows this. There's a sort of energetic vibration that comes off of this individual, which is very seductive and sort of very magnetic. in nature. I mean, and so they're, the eye contact, the psychopathic gaze, oftentimes is reptilian. In other words, there's a reptilian sort of a cold-blooded gaze, which most people are not familiar with seeing, but they're not familiar with saying, wow, that is a strange look. They just sort of usually interpret it as seductive, or that you feel a sexual connection with them. Usually, that's what it is, and that can be very intriguing and attractive. And oftentimes, this will set the relationship apart. Most people won't feel this sort of charismatic nature about everybody or anybody. So this person will then very much stand out to them, and then they'll become very attached and very clingy and very addicted to this person. And this psychopath, in other words, to sort of become and belong with this type of joking, their type of humor, their type of idiosyncratic comments, that might make people laugh and then drop their guard down, and then you're laid open and vulnerable. So you don't realize that you are vulnerable when you're in the sort of psychopathic grooming phase. You might consider it to be like love bombing, like you see in the narcissist, before they devalue and discard. And so you have to, if you're having troubles with a relationship that seems very plagued with hyper arousal, in other words, you're just overstimulated, not only intellectually but physically, and you cannot sort of get the feeling out, in other words, you're hyper aroused. They find ways to sort of really, get people, really aroused, in a sort of, I would say, abusive manner, rubbing too much, dirty talk, all sorts of this other stuff, inappropriate comments in public places, wanting people to, do things in their car, or, go into, strip outside, or something, and they think that they're not going to be caught, and then the police comes knocking at the car window. You're indecent in public, and then they're going to take you in unless the psychopath, they just boundary violation, not appropriate for the restaurant, not appropriate for the workplace, not appropriate for the church, not appropriate for the forest preserve. I mean, just what you might consider just inappropriate, and not just silly, but oftentimes this high-risk behavior oftentimes becomes then an exclusive in the relationship, and then people, interpret this as excitement or love, or the answer to my prayers. And so people have very difficult time sort of detaching from this. So you might feel a sense of withdrawal if you're trying to figure this out or break free from this type of relationship. Particularly the female psychopath, can use the body, I would say, in a lot of ways, in the looks that they are very seductive, and that men will fall for, married men, just, in other words, they just will oftentimes then get them under their spell. I mean, I think for a lot of men, it is very much like being under a spell, and they do things that would be out of character for them. This was my child's college fund for $150,000, and I just used this to purchase this individual, the psychopathic female, a house. And then they've been, they're just sort of conned. That's just sort of the old phrase, the con man. But, a lot of people have an image of a con man, but the psychopath oftentimes does not meet that image. I mean, they can be a doctor, a lawyer, an Indian chief, as they say, a priest, a judge. I mean, in other words, in very high places in society, where they have then risen to the top because they don't have certain inhibitions or morality. They don't have a needle towards any sort of true north. It's just whatever it is that they want, that is what they're driven for, and they don't feel held back. So this hyper arousal, as really part of that sort of that boredom. So they will feel very empty. They'll just go and they'll need to, and I think that's why they will engage in a lot of these high risk behaviors with a number of individuals, and then you'll feel that there's sort of no presence from this person, even when they're present. There's something about them. It's just, when they sort of drop their vibe, it just is sort of like a blank. And it might be very unusual for them. So you say, whoa, like that vibe is very out of character for that person. And then you might find them like running out, or, constantly needing to do something, or buy something, or, engage in lots of dating behind their, other sort of social obligations behind their spouse's back, or what have you. To sort of keep them fulfilled, to keep that testosterone, burning up, and that drive that they must feel. But then, to then feed their desire, where I think they are oftentimes get humor out of hurting other people. So that's really part of the problem, is that they then take a certain pride or joy with hurting other people, and it becomes very premeditated and pre-calculated. And when I say to ruin the lives of others, I'm not saying that they're going to ruin your life. I mean, they literally have no problem. In fact, they feel that is their end. I mean, that is their end point. That is the answer. That is the bottom line. So if they can then, have ruined someone or hurt someone, either in business, relationships, in their community, in their workplace, in their school, wherever it is. So that's how they sort of feel effective, and to them, that juices them up. They might think it's funny, but unfortunately, they take they take pleasure in other people's pain. So this becomes a real severe issue. Particularly meaning when people are then become so brainwashed and gaslighted by this individual, and then their thinking is foreign to themselves, it can create a real feeling of fearfulness and terror in that individual, because their thoughts are kind of sort of reprogrammed by the psychopath that is meant to serve the psychopathic relationship. So when you expose the psychopath, then you realize that type of communication is not going to fly with other people. So you might have developed sort of this talk with them, a way of looking things, particularly hypersexual in nature. They, I would say, have a tendency to sexualize everything. So this propensity for boredom might oftentimes leave people wondering, and then especially when they don't get a text, they don't get a follow-up, and then they start to begin to sniff on their trail and saying something is awry here. Something is not right. They weren't here when they said they were going to be. They didn't pick up the kids. They didn't do this that they said they were going to do, or they're just not here. They're not answering for 11 hours. 2 days, and then they'll like, oh, didn't I tell you I was at a work convention? I told this to you, and then they might even sort of plant this and go back and write it in somebody's calendar. I mean, they think of things and will use things in an environment to sort of brainwash or gaslight people, and they will do it intentionally. And so it will be, I think, very amusing to them when they see people trying to figure it out. They might leave strange receipts out. Strange stains on their clothing, just all sort, what is this? And it can be nothing else, it's just like, and so they get this, create a fear in others, and then, but yet you've got the fear, and then they're addicted to the hyperarousal, so they cannot think clearly, and you have to say, whoa, this relationship is out of control, this person, has some issues, and I don't want, don't give me a tissue. I don't want that issue. But they don't know how to break free from it. So oftentimes they will then end up sort of confronting this individual, to sort of let it all out. And because of the violation energy, when they begin to, work through the relationship. So that propensity to boredom is because they have this physiological difference about them. And so, you might feel you can't keep up, or, oftentimes it might be even interpreted as the positive. Wow, you've got such high energy. You're so intellectual, or how can you do all this? So it might be then interpreted in the positive, which is all more a boon for the psychopaths, because then they know, hey, I've got this one hooked. And they really do seek to hook others through idiosyncratic language, because they don't have the emotional content. They don't experience abstract like love, brotherhood, patriotism, they freedom. Like they just don't experience those abstracts or things, that you would normally be aroused by, or like if you were to be a bystander and see something in the street, you'd be like, oh my gosh, a psychopath would, be like interested or fascinated, where another might say, oh my gosh, let's protect this guy. The psychopath might be like, yeah, get him, and you're like, what? Or, they might see something in nature that is appalling, and then they're like, yeah, get him, and they're sort of rooting for the bad guy. And, but this becomes a real issue, and it can be very thought disorienting and disturbing for those people who have been sort of in a relationship with them for a certain period of time on their journey. Whether it's a family member, a work colleague, someone in your community, your doctor, your lawyer, whoever it is, these people, your financial advisor, you can find these people in all areas and walks of life, but oftentimes they will rise to the top. It doesn't mean that they won't also sink to the bottom, but this is part of the deception. So, realize that then it's okay to break the cycle. It might be very difficult when you're kind of reeling off of this, and very, your thoughts are just like all over the place. But realize that this is part of the indicator. If you're in a relationship with a psychopath, you might see some of these red flags. So give yourself permission to go no contact. Give yourself the gift of forgiveness. Work on soothing yourself. And give yourself the gift of, giving yourself the time to trust the process to heal. You will recover your sense of self, and it will be better, stronger, and more balanced. And you'll have a greater appreciation, not only for yourself, but for the healthy individuals in life. This is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today, and I hope that these videos do help. Please share, please subscribe, and for goodness sake, please donate for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support. Peace out, peace be with you, and have a beautiful day.